Welcome to Eternal Family Adoptions, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share stories and secrets of building forever families through faith-centered adoptions. I'm Donna Pope. Join us as we discuss how our faith can guide our adoption journey and create family connections.
How many of them live close to you?
Most of them live in Utah, where I live, but I have two kids who live in Texas. Yeah.
And then how do you do Thanksgiving?
We have a very large house, and we had 4 standard size tables pushed together when we actually had a house fire in 2020. so after we moved back home, we'd had the neighborhood do a home makeover for us, and so we have these 4 tables pushed together with benches and chairs, and we can seat 20 at one time at one table.
All right, who's next?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so 98. After that, that's when we got the half sibling to our first infant adoption. Our daughter was born here in Utah, so biological mom came up here, but unfortunately, her addiction to methamphetamines had caused the baby inside of her to have really significant heart problems. And she almost died. And we were able to get her here and delivered, but they just told us in the newborn intensive care unit, look, she's got maybe a 5% chance of survival, which was really their way of saying she's going to die, but we want to leave you this tiny bit of hope. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult at the time, right? Because I already had 9 kids at that point, and she needed somebody with her there in the NICU. And so my husband and I were trading off who could spend time with her. And after seven weeks there, she was able to come home, and she has some residual heart problems. She was born in congestive heart failure. And drug withdrawal, and it was really rough for her as a little baby, but she still has some residual heart murmur, and not anything super significant, but it's still there. But she's 25. She's a teacher. She lives at home right now while she's getting herself established in her career. But, she's great, and we love her, and like we love all our kids.
Well, and it was good for you to bring her and have the help that she got.
Yeah. And, again, so she came home on oxygen and a whole, arrangement of medication that she was supposed to be on. And, we had in and out of the cardiologist, and, a lot of tracking that slowed down as she got older. Right. And it became clear that she was going to be able to recover from this heart issue. And like I said, she still has some residual stuff, but it's not something that impedes her life. So that's good. So that was 2000, millennial baby. And as we got through the year 2000, I can't remember now, actually, when we started looking for the next kids, but we had an opportunity to go back to Kazakhstan. So it had been, by the time we went back, it had been 8 years since we had been to Kazakhstan the first time, but we were able to go back and adopt. And this time we did it with an agency, and we adopted a little boy. And when we went over there, like we said, we knew that we were fine to adopt a child, again, with arthrogryposis. So we said yes to this little 3-year-old. What they didn't tell us at the time was that he was really significantly developmentally delayed, that they had left him in the baby room and didn't talk to him. So he was nonverbal at 3.5 years old when we ended up getting him. Cutest kid ever, right? And he's 27 now, still has developmental delays and physical disabilities, but he works a job and works at Deseret Industries. And when we got there, we already had a large family, and we had said we want to adopt a second child if we can, and especially a boy, because international adoption, at least at that time, people were requesting girls, and boys were a lot harder to place. And so the child that we had the referral for and accepted as a referral was Asian. He was so Kazakh, right? And they look like, if you think of Genghis Khan, that's their ancestry, right? And so we went to this orphanage, and we actually, what we did is we took over this gigantic scrapbook. Remember back in the days when scrapbooks were so popular, and it went to like a social worker. And by the time we ended up in court, it was on the judge's desk. And it had just made its way through. And they were really surprised to see that we were a normal family. They just could not wrap their heads around how is this not like an orphanage? We had birthday parties and we had camping and we just had all these pictures and stuff of family stuff. And they're just like, okay, right. You're a family and we can see that you're a family. So we got the second child at the same time. Here's the thing about that adoption. So we were in process in 2001. And if you remember what happened in September of 2001, it really stopped international travel for a while. So we traveled to Kazakhstan, which is just above the stans that were in the news in early October of 2001. And we had people who were like, I hope you don't get killed. Like, well, we hope so too. Right? We hope so too. And when we got there, in Kazakhstan, there was nothing but kindness and outreach, and people had hung American flags over their balconies. And, I never felt like I was in danger at all. And yet people were so worried because we were going on this really long international flight right after 9/11. And it was probably 3.5, 4 weeks after 9/11 had happened. And we're just like, we're fine. We're going to go. And it was fine. So we went and we got these two little boys and our daughter, so the one who had been born with the heart issues, she was under 2 years old. Like, we'll just take her with us. She could be a lap child on the way home. And she was blonde haired with curly blonde hair. And so when you're seeing these kids that look Asian and they have this straight black hair, that was the time where people were coming up and touching her hair and saying, oh my gosh, let me touch your hair. Right? So cute. So that was our second set of artificial triplets of 3 kids born in the year 2000. Actually, that's not true because the one was 3 and one was 1. So we had 2 the same age, and then we had one a little older, and it was a different adoption where we got the third one.
So what was the other adoption? You got the third one.
Well, so that was 2001. And then in 2003, so about every couple of years, right? In 2003, we ended up with our first placement from a disrupted adoption. And those were 2 boys that were siblings. They were 10 and 7 when they came to our house. And they had been adopted from Ethiopia about 9 months before they came to our house. So they were not even that fluent in English. But they were so delightful that it was like, I would go back to Ethiopia again. And even though I hadn't been to Ethiopia to adopt them because they came from a disrupted adoption. But the next year, we did go to Ethiopia, and that's where we adopted 4 kids. So we adopted a 12-year-old at that time, a sibling set that was 7 and 4, and then a newborn who was very, very sick. And the nuns at the orphanage were like, we don't know if she'll survive long enough to get home, but if you want to try to adopt her, you can go ahead. And she was quite sick when we got her home, but she's 21 now. She's fine.
Wow. So you did, that was a second placement of those first 2 Ethiopian boys.
Yep.
How did you get involved in that?
Oh, that was the internet, right? So you start to have groups that you're connected with, and people were asking for help with respite care, and we're like, yeah, we can do that. And then they ended up staying. That's how our other child from a disrupted adoption came as well. And it was really just about 9 months after we got those 4 kids from Ethiopia that we got this little girl from Guatemala. Did not have to travel there, but she was a disrupted adoption as well. And joined our family. And she was 4 when she came to us, and she's 24 now. So it's been 20 years.
Right.
Yeah. And then we did one additional adoption. So we had a failed adoption actually that we did in Zambia. It's a long story, but we did a legal adoption. They were legally adopted to us, legal birth certificate change, adoption papers, new passports with the Richardson last name. And then when we went to get their visas, we ran into a problem with some really strong anti-LDS sentiment where they literally would rather see the kids die than in an LDS home. And so they actually were successful in preventing us from taking these kids home. And we know for sure that one did die, and we don't know for sure on the other 2, which it was just a huge sorrow and loss in our lives. And then in 2007 is when we had the opportunity to adopt this little girl who was missing most of her brain and was going to have a really short life. And so that was our last adoption, was 2007.
Wow. Those are amazing stories.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. And so all through that whole process, you felt, going back to our original thought, you felt maybe not as strongly as you did when you first saw the Romanian children, but you felt this kind of guidance along the whole way.
No question. And, again, these are really important decisions and life-changing ones, right? For all concerned. And so we really felt like we had to make sure that this was the right path for our family and for us to be on. And look, I'm telling you, there were times where I went to my husband and said, "What do you think about adopting this child?" And he'd be like, "No, I'm not feeling it." And over time, we didn't adopt that child or children, right? I tell people if I got every single child I was ever interested in adopting, we'd have 50, but we don't. We have half that many. But I think there's no question for me that God cares about families. God cares about children. God cares about what things are going to look like in the future. And, it's been helpful too, as my kids have become adults and they have their own struggles and their own issues. And I remember hearing people say adult kids come with adult sized problems and they're not as easy to solve as a kiss on the knee and a Band-Aid. And yet there's no question in my mind that this was our path. Our answers were so clear that this was what we were supposed to do. And we made sure we checked in every single time with God, right? And said, is this the next right thing? And eventually we came to an end and we were done. And I'm okay with that. And then we had the opportunity to raise a granddaughter, and I love her deeply, and she calls me mom, and she knows that she's not legally adopted. We're her permanent guardians at this point, but the love is the same, and she keeps me young. I'm 50 years older than she is.
Well, so you've done a kinship adoption as well.
Yeah, it's not an adoption yet, and at
It's a
this point,
guardianship.
it's a guardianship. Yeah, it's a permanent guardianship. It's legal, all the paperwork, right? And we don't know if or when it will turn into adoption. I assume that if it doesn't happen before she turns 18, that we'll probably make it official when she's 18. But at this point, right, she's almost 11. She'll turn 11 in a couple of weeks. And we have had her since she was a newborn.
Do you want to tell us more about that story?
Yeah. So our first daughter that was adopted from Romania actually really did struggle and does still struggle with mental health issues. And she's unable to parent, and she knows that. And she had an older child, and that child was actually adopted by our second oldest biological son and his wife, and they live in Texas. And when she had this other baby, she asked my husband and I if we would raise the baby, and we are doing so with permanent legal guardianship. But like, if it were to happen again, and there's no reason to think that it would, but if it were to happen again, like, we're not going to start over in our 60s, right? Then there would be another conversation. But it can be complex, right? And yet I will say for her that in spite of the challenges that she faces in taking care of herself, she was able to recognize that she would not be able to raise a child. She's never been married. And so I think it was a really brave decision on her part to place the oldest one for adoption, to voluntarily relinquish, and then to sign the papers for guardianship as well. It's hard, right? It's hard, but we have a relationship. In fact, she lives in our house with us. And yet she is totally respectful of our parenting of her biological daughter, who's, we call her our daughter. So
You've mentioned many times today the spiritual dimension of this adoption journey that you and your husband have gone on, how the Spirit has guided you when it was time to adopt again, how the Spirit has guided you specifically about which children to adopt or not to adopt. Can you share with us a little bit more about the spiritual dimension of this experience?
How does it feel? What do you know?
I'll say it took me a while to recognize what the Spirit felt like after I had that really overwhelming experience and was expecting that to happen every time, and it didn't. And then it was like, well, like, I feel okay about moving forward, but I'm not on fire, right? And so it took some time for me to learn. I have kids who they've chosen a different religious path, I think, it's fair to say. And sometimes they'll ask me, why are you still in that same faith tradition, right? Why are you still part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And my answer to them every time is, I have had too many confirmations of a God in heaven who knows you and loves you and knows our family and has answered my prayers, not only about the joining of the family, but how to navigate through grief and loss. We've buried 3 of our children, not to mention the ones that we've lost through the adoption process. And, you know, through other kinds of sorrows, I just can't deny that God has had his hand in all of these adoptions. And, you know, when I was younger and we were talking about biological family involvement and what that would look like on the other side, maybe I was maybe a little uncomfortable, like not knowing how that would all look. And I still don't know how it would all look, except that it doesn't matter anymore, that there are people who love them, who will be there on the other side, and we're all going to be great friends, and how that all works out, it's going to be fine. And it's like our children from Ethiopia, we have a couple of sibling sets, and for one of them, he's 32 now, and he's engaged to marry a woman he met in Colorado who is also Ethiopian. And we're going to go to Ethiopia for his wedding. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because his biological siblings found him on Facebook last year and reached out to reestablish a relationship. They were not involved in the adoption decision. And he had always hoped, even as a 10-year-old, long before we had the internet, he had always hoped that he would be able to reconnect with 2 older siblings and 1 younger sibling. And he has that opportunity. He's spoken with them, but he has not met them in person. And that will happen as he goes to Ethiopia for his wedding. Do I love them dearly? Yes, I do. Right? Do I love his parents who are on the other side? Yes, I do. Right? And I love him, and I love his bride to be. And, you know, one of the things that happens, I think, with any type of relationship is that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. And so I have enough love for him and his new wife and any kids that they have, but also have love for his extended family that's biologically related to them. And there's something there, right? And I love them too. And I just, look, parenting is hard. And it makes it sound like I had all the answers and, you know, God just stepped in and rescued me. Parenting is hard. And I don't have all the answers. And sometimes parenting adult kids who are going through really rough stuff, I don't know how to do it. And sometimes I just, you know, go in prayer and plead for help to what is the best way for me to be there, right? And sometimes the answer is just love them. Sometimes the answer is I've got to set boundaries, and it's not okay for you to do this. And I'm really, really sorry. I still love you, but you cannot do this in my house around these kids, right? And those are hard conversations. And I think God plays the long game. And that's one thing I've really come to appreciate, is that we don't have to have all the answers in this life, actually. And I'm super, super grateful for a belief in a next life, and that we're in act 2 of a 3-act play. And this is where the crisis points are. And this is where the testing and the trials are, but that everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, we're not at the end. And it sounds cliche, but I really believe that. And it really helps get me through the times, even now, where my kids are all adults, where it's hard to say, your problems are so big, I don't know how to help you except to say, I really love you and I'm really sorry.
Oh, I just love that. I'm raising 3 adopted kids, and I won't go into all the challenges that we have, but I don't need to, because you totally get it. Mm-hmm. You totally get it. And you understand those challenges. And you've been through many, many, many more than I have.
It's not a competition, right?
No, it's an understanding.
Yeah. And it's hard, and it's not necessarily unique to adoptive families, but it is something, right, where you just say, look, parenting is a refiner's fire in many ways. And to just go back to the bottom line of, I love these kids. And some of them, like I have adult kids who don't want to talk to me right now because they blame me for taking them out of their country or for not giving them enough attention, or I don't know even sometimes, right? And it's like, you know what? You'll have to find your own path, but I love you. Here's a birthday present. Here's a Christmas present. Here's a card for Halloween, right? I mean, I'm trying to do my part to maintain relationships because God plays the long game. And so it helps me think forward and play the long game myself, right?
You've talked a bit about this relationship that you have with the extended biological families. Now, you adopted one, she was a meth user, and you adopted 2 of her children. Do you have a relationship with her?
She is no longer living. She has passed away, and we did have somewhat of a relationship. And I will say that it's different for my 2 daughters. One has more of a relationship with the extended family there. And the other one, the one who almost died, she's not as interested. And that's okay, right? That's okay for her to be able to find what's comfortable. With my kids in Ethiopia, I don't have a relationship yet with his extended, with his siblings. But because I'm a writer, one of the things that I'm planning on doing when I go there is to kind of write the story of this reunion after 25 years.
So because of the internet and because of so many different ways people can find each other, adoption really is not closed. I mean, even international adoption is not closed. So talk just a little bit about how you as an adoptive mom who deeply loves these children now has to, in some ways, share them with extended biological family.
So for me, it's not an issue. And again, I will say that when I was younger and the kids were younger, it was a little harder. It was a little more uncomfortable for me. I watched the biological mom of our first infant adoption. Like I was around the corner, but I heard her sobbing as she said goodbye to her baby. And that is just, it was heart-wrenching, right? And yet she also said, I know I can't raise a child. And I know that this is going to be best for her. And so there's that, right? I think love multiplies. I don't feel like I'm in competition, and it's probably easier because my kids are adults now that they can have these types of conversations. But it's been, I want to say maybe 5 years. For Christmas one year, we gave all of our children DNA tests. We said, look, we want you to be able to find out what your genetic origins are. And if you can end up finding biological siblings or extended family, then we think that's great. And you can navigate that or not navigate that however you want to or don't want to. And we have these really interesting genetic mixes of kids, right? And nobody's really found extended family off of the genetic testing, but maybe as more people put their DNA into the database, maybe that will happen someday. I don't know, but it could. It's just not threatening to me anymore. And I guess it felt a little threatening when I was younger and the kids were younger. I thought maybe, it would become uncomfortable and they would change their mind and come back and take the kids. And of course that didn't happen. And, again, love just multiplies. And so there's lots of people to love on each other. And I think it's great.
And life's hard enough, right? We want our kids to have all of the support and help that they can possibly get.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Having more people to love you is not a bad thing.
I just can't even tell you how much I respect what you've said. And the thing I respect the most about it is there's no pretense that this is easy. None of this is easy. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bad. And so it's oftentimes I'll talk with adoptive families and they'll struggle with, sometimes I feel like, here, let me give you a child to ruin your life. And I kind of feel a little, because I know that if they're taking on this child, the challenges that are going to come with taking on this child are going to be sometimes immense. So now looking back, are you glad you did it?
Yes. And I think to your point, I mean, one of the things that I did when I was adding children is I was trying to learn as much as I could about the process from an adoptee's point of view. And I didn't want people to feel like, pat Holly on the back for doing this good thing. I wanted to be really cognizant and aware that this was a loss for these kids, right? And And because I had experienced grief with my daughter with disabilities, there was something, right, where I could hook into and say, look, if I had lost everything I knew, I'm coming to a place, these people look funny, they talk funny, they smell funny, their food is funny, right? How terrifying is that to a toddler or a preschooler, right? Or a 10-year-old? It just, for me to be able to empathize with how much that was, right? I never expected, and I still don't expect my kids to be grateful to me for adopting them. I think that's the wrong approach. What I wanted, and especially as kids joined our family who were older kids, I explained to people that it was more like an arranged marriage where one party didn't even really have that much of a choice, right? I mean, if you've got somebody coming in, and we had a 10-year-old, a couple 7-year-olds, we also had a 12-year-old, trying to integrate them into a family where you say, oh, I love you so much. Look, it took me time to learn to love them. It took them longer to learn to love me. And looking back, yeah, I would totally do it again. In some ways, I'm glad I didn't know how hard it was going to be. I might have made different choices, right? But it's, I mean, you would ask any parent, which child would you give up? And I don't have an answer to that. That's a dumb question, right? Of course I love them all. And of course the relationship ebbs and flows and looks different in different ways. And, you know, we have 10 grandchildren now. We have another one on the way. And my husband and I, like, we have some kids that are like, I wish you spent more time with my child, right, as your grandchild. And I'm like, I totally appreciate that. And for the first time in my adult lifetime, I have a full-time job, right? And I'm not home all day, every day. And, you know, and so dynamics change all the time. And yet it's trying to manage all that. And, you know, you talked about Thanksgiving, you talked about Christmas. I used to sew pajama pants for Christmas. And I stopped the year I hit 35 pants. I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore.
Again, so much to learn. You're a learner. You're a lifelong learner. And clearly you had children with reactive attachment disorder. Clearly you had children with special needs, medical issues. And as a nurse, that was very helpful. You had I'm sure that there were criminal problems at some point in the thing.
As they got older, for one, yeah, we've had one that spent a little bit of time in jail. We've had some drug issues with some of our kids. We have a couple it's very, very difficult for them to keep a job, even as adults, right? And yeah, I mean, those types of issues. And again, one of the things I think I learned that's really important, that not all parents learn, adoptive or otherwise, is that my children's success or failure is actually not a reflection on how good or bad my parenting was.
That's a tough lesson for us to learn.
It's really tough. And I think one of the ways I learned that is because the family was so big and the kids were raised the same, but I had some kids who chose harder directions maybe than others, or they had, additional things that made those choices more appealing. I could look at them and say, you were raised the same. And so maybe it's not me, but here's what that also means is I don't get to take credit for all the great things, right, that kids are doing, and just say, look, I love you. I'm here to support you. We're here to be a safety net if you need it. We've had kids do the revolving door, come back and live with us for a while. And sometimes it's because they want to save money to buy their first house, which is totally great. Sometimes it's like, we can't get on our feet. We really need some help. That's also fine, right? We have the ability to do that. But the ability to disconnect my personal identity from my children's actions, hard lesson to learn, but a really important one.
Super important. I'm studying Doctrine and Covenant 76 right now and thinking about all these degrees of glory. And I've about decided that if you want to get to the celestial kingdom, you got to be willing to take on all of this kind of crap. You just have to be willing to take on these difficult situations. And if you don't want to, that's okay. That's okay.
I'll say, I think everybody's path is different and unique to them, right? And there are things that I would not wish on anybody else but that I have learned from, and including burying our children, right? And I'll say grief can be a great teacher. it can also make you hard. And so sometimes, like I have a son going through a really difficult divorce right now, and that happens, and he's not sure how to navigate it. And all I can say to him is, I love you. I'm sorry that it's so hard. And believe me, please trust me that there will be an end to the pain that's so intense right now. And he's not sure he believes me. But because I've done it more than once, I know that there is an end. It's just that it's so hard, right? And having kids who don't look like me has allowed me to see that I have a position of privilege that they don't have, even right here in Utah. And that has allowed me to see and ask questions, especially in the political sphere where I work. It has allowed me to ask questions like, how is this going to impact people who don't have the same kind of life that I do? How is this going to impact the single mom who's working 2 part-time jobs who doesn't have health insurance, right? How is this going to impact, those families who are already living on the margins? How those types of questions. And it seems sometimes obvious to me that just because I have one experience doesn't mean everybody has the same, but it is not obvious to people that, some people just feel like I'm having a universal experience, but that's not actually true. And having children who have a lot different experiences for a variety of reasons has really expanded my ability, I think, to see others, to recognize their path is different than mine. Not a single one of my kids wants a big family, not a single one. And that's okay, right? That's their path. And I'm not going to go to them and say, well, I think you should have 10, right? If they want to, great. And I'm super happy to be grandma to those kids, but that's their path and their decision. And it really, there's so many great opportunities to love other people and serve other people. And certainly I spent time doing that with my family, but it was also important to spend time serving other people outside of our family. And we created a family ethos of, we're going to go outside the family unit and we're going to serve. And we've served in food pantries. And I had one daughter who, when we talked to her, what would you like for a present from graduating from high school? She said, I want to go serve in an orphanage. Well, how can you say no to that?
Yeah.
Right? So we did. I took her to serve in one, right? And it's just like, there's just, sometimes it's really, really wonderful to see what these kids have incorporated into their lives that are really important foundational approaches to life that I hope that they learned at home, but really it's become who they are.
This has been an amazing discussion, and thank you very much for it. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, one last question I'd like to ask. So we love to learn from those people that have been there and done that. For adoptive parents that are much earlier in their journey than you are, what is the best wisdom, the best advice, the best secrets that you could share with them?
I will say, first of all, hang in there. It's worth it. Second of all, it's not going to be as ideal as you think it might be. And to really be flexible in your expectations, right? I think being a parent of children with disabilities really helped me in that aspect as well, because not all of my children were going to be able to go to school in the same way that other kids were. And so I didn't have the expectation, for example, that all of my kids needed to get straight A's because school is important to me. I didn't have that because some of my kids were not verbal. My daughter, who was born biologically to me, never progressed past a 3-month-old level, right, in her physical abilities. And so to be flexible in your expectations, because what they love and are good at may be totally different than what you love and are good at. And that's okay, because you can love and support them where they are. And I will just say, again, it's a long game. Parenting is a long game. And to hang in there through the rough parts, because you'll have them. You'll have rough parts. But to hang in there and go back to those answers that you got, like I've done, and say, did I know going into this that this is the right path for our family? And then hang on to that, right? It'll get better.
People will often ask me that when they're looking towards an adoption, and they'll say, but what happens if it doesn't work out? And I remember the first time I burst out and I said, I think, woohoo. And they go, what? But then I realized it's the tough times that make you into the person that you really want to be. particularly for me, for adoptive families, I like them to have gone through a tough time, because then they can relate to the mom that's placing her child for adoption. They can experience a little bit of her feelings of loss, a little bit of the tough stuff she's going through. So it's the tough stuff that makes us into the people that then can benefit and relate to others. You've been through tough stuff.
Yeah. And, I think exactly what you're saying, because I went through tough stuff, I can look at my kids too and say, I personally think that all adoption involves some trauma. It doesn't matter if they're brand new babies that are placed. I think that adoption, by its definition, involves loss. And sometimes I think we have this idea that it doesn't matter if they're newborn, or, if they left this horrible orphanage where they never had enough to eat. There's still loss, right? And it's okay that your kids are mad at you, right, for adopting them. And sometimes I've had kids that are like super angry that I adopted them, right? And it's like, it's not that it's realistic. Like, one of my kids wanted to go back to her teenage biological mother in a developing third world country because she thought that mom wouldn't make her do chores. Well, bless your heart. But also, that can be normal. And so sometimes it was, is this normal teenage stuff, or is this because of adoption? But being able to have empathy for your children who might be going through hard stuff as they start to question, why didn't my biological mother want me, right? It's much more complex than that. But sometimes kids have those types of questions, right? And it's important for us to be able to sit with them in their hurt and not try to wash away all of the, don't worry, it's a really beautiful experience. Okay, it's okay to acknowledge that they're hurting and that it's hard. Because that will deepen your relationship too, when they feel like they can turn to you and say, look, I have this question about my biological mother. I don't understand. And I can say for most of my kids, I don't know really anything about their biological family. And I can say, you know what, all I can tell you is about, in this country, these are the types of situations that parents are in. And sometimes they make a choice that seems really hard by putting a child in an orphanage, but it would keep you alive. And they might not have been able to keep you alive. Like, I don't know for sure, right? But being willing to bear witness to your children's pain will help you as a parent and will help your relationship with that child, I think.
Let me ask another question. You talked earlier about some of your kids having reactive attachment disorder, and you talked about recently in this question about how every adoption has some form of trauma, which I completely agree with. What percentage of the children, at least the percentage of the children that came from orphanages that you've adopted, have experienced reactive attachment disorder? How big of a factor has that been in your home?
I would say there's probably 3 of them who have it enough that it has bled over into their adult life. And as adults, that looks like borderline personality disorder. So that's probably, out of 20, they weren't all international, but 15%, 20% maybe. So the real miracle is that not all of them did.
Yeah, that is my question. I've read before that essentially every single child that comes out of an orphanage that's adopted has to deal with reactive attachment disorder. That is really amazing that you only have 3.
Really, and that was enough that it was really noticeable. I will say, look, kids have to learn to attach too, and that comes with trust. And our daughter that was missing the fingers and toes, she was called a bad baby in her orphanage because she wasn't physically perfect. So she's 29. She's married. She's been in a long-term relationship with her husband. They now have this little baby. And this little baby actually, it turns out, has the same issue with missing fingers and toes. Well, we didn't know it was genetic. We thought it was just a random mutation, right? And so now we know. But you know what? Is there anybody else who is going to be better prepared to be his mom than this daughter who lived with it as well? There's not. But she came, they did not, they were not attentive to her. They called her a bad baby, but she never really struggled with attachment disorder. Why? I don't know. Sometimes maybe it's just a blessing. And one of the things my husband and I thought too, that was an advantage of the really big family, is they could attach to siblings without feeling the pressure to attach to a parent because it's different. And so they could love their siblings. And as they started to develop loving relationships with others, it could expand to, parents. And I would say she doesn't have any sign and never has really had any sign of reactive attachment disorder. She had attachment insecurity at the beginning, but by the time she headed off to kindergarten, she was well attached and healthy. So we have been lucky that not all of them have. And some of them, it's so bad that as adults, it impacts their ability to be a functioning adult.
Well, this has been wonderful. We'd like to ask if we wanted you back on another one, would you come?
Yeah, of course. And, I've mentioned this before, but I didn't know how hard it was going to be the parent of adult kids. Like, I didn't feel like that was part of the recipe here that I was signing up for, but it is hard. And, I want to be a good mom and a good grandma to these adult kids. And it's interesting because you have all of these different dynamics. So even just trying to organize, for example, Christmas, right? We still do like a secret Santa with our family. It is so much work. So I use a randomizer on the internet now, and I just plug everybody's name in, but I have to check with every single person and their family. Do you feel like you can participate this year? Like, all of those things before we can actually do it. And then I feel like I've got to follow up and, the planning for feeding, 35
assistant mom.
It's, it doesn't ever end really. It's just that I don't have to do it all day, every day. Yeah. I mean, not in the same way that I used to.
Let's conclude with you just telling about, on your professional level, what some of the projects are that you like to share with people.
Sure. So if you care about Utah politics and you want to follow, you can go to utahpolicy.com and sign up for the newsletter that I do. But I love being on the radio. I've only been doing it for about a month, but it is really fun to have a discussion about the news of the day. Some of the topics are very serious, of course, and that's less fun. But one of the things that my co-host and I try to do is we want to break things down so that if people who are listening have a question, but they're not super familiar with the behind the scenes on the politics and even some of the language that you use, you get into certain lingo and people are like, oh, well, this and this and this. And you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I just said that today on my show, actually, is we had an economist explaining something about economic indicators. And I'm like, I actually don't understand what you mean. And so we're trying to break those down in short segments. They're really about 8 or 9 minutes a piece, so that people can understand. And you can follow along at KSL News Radio. We're live every day from 9 to noon, but those shows also come out in podcast format if people care, right? We haven't talked about adoption on our radio show yet, but I certainly would love to. I think it would be great. I have one last thing to add, and I'll just say this. When I was deep in the trenches of parenthood, I wasn't sure that I would ever make it out of the trenches. People would always say, your kids are going to grow up and they're going to move away. And I wasn't sure that actually was going to be true. But come to find out, it actually is true. And now I can look back and say, I'm not deep in those motherhood trenches anymore. And I have it's a different perspective. I'm not deep into diapers and formula and potty training. And I can look back and I can see really happy times that we had with our kids and be able to look forward to the next generation. And so for parents who are deep in the trenches, look, you are spending really valuable, important time taking care of your family. And I had a hard time finding God in the poopy diapers, but when I started to shift my focus about what I was really doing, I could still find joy. I didn't love the poopy diapers, but I could still find joy in the parenting, even though it was really overwhelming. I haven't slept through the night in 38 years, right? But there really is opportunity for joy and happiness, even when you're up to your elbows in poopy diapers and bottles and, crying kids who tell you that they hate you. It really is a short period of time that feels really long when you're right in the middle of it.
Holly, thank you so much for having you on the show today. Thanks for the wisdom and the stories that you've shared with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining this episode of Eternal Family Adoptions. I'm Donna Pope. Every child deserves not just a home, but a forever family rooted in love and faith. So visit our website, eternalfamilyadoptions.com, to access faith-based adoption resources and sign up for a newsletter. And join us next time as we continue this journey together.